It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC, taking a look back at what was an incredibly frustrating weekend for the Whites. A 2-0 loss to Crystal Palace at Craven Cottage that extends the home curse against the Eagles. My name's Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today as we try to dissect exactly what went wrong for Fulham on Saturday. And joining me to do so, I'm delighted to say it's a very old school panel. This is Fulhamish OG heritage. I'm very, very excited. First up, Mr. Dominic Betts. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not bad, mate. You know, I just wish we could play the top six every week.
Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. How long did it take you to leave this game, Dom?
Oh, as soon as the actual second goal went in. It's quite annoyed, actually, when the first one got disallowed. I was like, I've got to stay here a bit longer. But yeah, as soon as that second went in, I was like, see you later, because I was like, there's no chance we're doing anything today. As I said, I saw your brother on the way out, gave him an applause for leaving at the same time as well. Managed to have a pint in Bishop's and get to the pub where I was meeting a Palace mate of mine before the Palace mate even got to the pub. So I think that sums it all up.
Yeah, I think so. The boys in front of me decided they had enough once the disallowed goal went in. Didn't matter that it got called off. Didn't matter that it got cancelled. Mate, honestly, I think I wish I went at half time. So we are where we are. It's Mr. Drew Heatley. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Just call me the shepherd because I'm rolling with the goats this evening.
I had no idea where you were going with that one, pal, but I'm excited. And all the way from Canada, it's only Mr. Ben Jarman. How you doing, pal?
Hello, mate. Yes, I'm very good. I would give a quick shout out to Whistler Public Library for letting me borrow their soundproof booth for the next hour or two. And I also just want to give a big hello to our American contingent. Obviously, Thursday night was amazing for some of us, not you guys. 4 Nations champions, Canada, oh Canada.
Amazing. It's great to have you from all the way across the pond, Jarms. And I know there's very exciting news coming on a full North America front very, very shortly. But we'll get into all of that later down the line. Let's start, though, Drew, with some 3-word reviews, shall we?
Yeah, obviously, as you would imagine, quite a few people are rattled. We got Fulham fan news with an Eze win, which is was Eze pickings really, but I will put it in there anyway. Black, White, and Fred with passports away again. Certainly feels like it's in out, shake it all about this season. James Wilson with likely origin story. It was probably your origin story, the way that your head was on Mars yesterday, Jack. I think certainly could have been. And then we've got Graying Sideburns brackets Brian with complete rotation Tuesday. And then he's put a picture of the FA Cup Man United versus Fulham on the weekend. So I think he's given up on the league completely in favour of FA Cup glory. I'm not quite there yet, but I can see the method in the madness.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Heatley. Dom, I'm going to start with you because I think that you made that point, obviously, about can we play the top six every week. It did feel a bit like Robin Hood strikes again for Fulham, and this lack of consistency really does feel like it's starting to hurt us in a way that, you know, this season, I've said this before, and, you know, we were all on such a high after the Forest game, and you come back from it with this opportunity to kick on, to solidify and to push up the table. You know, you have these 2 games, Crystal Palace and Wolves away, neither of which were ever going to be easy, considering Palace's away form and the fact that Wolves have taken a little bit of an upturn and, you know, got a good result themselves this weekend. But it felt like an opportunity for Fulham to cement themselves in the picture for European qualification. And every time we raise ourselves back above that parapet, every single time that we give ourselves that hope that maybe the passports can come out of the drawers, we drop a performance like this. And it's not the result, it's the performance as much as anything else.
Yeah, the performance was absolutely diabolical. We've gone from basically one Saturday putting in our best performance of the season to the next Saturday probably putting one of our worst in. I mean, I think we've played, you know, at the teams we played in the bottom 8 at home, I think we've won 1, and that's against Leicester. And then our record away at the top 6, we've only lost 1, which is to Man City, and we shouldn't have lost that game. So whether it's we can't beat low blocks, whether it's we then getting the players up for it against teams who aren't in the top six. I don't know what it is, but the performance yesterday was just strange, diabolical. Smith Rowe had one of his best games, arguably his best game in the Fulham shirt last weekend, and was back to being his non-existent self against Crystal Palace. We didn't seem to be able to counteract their 3-5-2 at all. And, I think you could tell from sort of the opening, half hour, 45 minutes, like we weren't going to get into this game. We didn't threaten their goalkeeper. It's bad when you lose 2-0 and your best player is probably a goalkeeper, and you're looking at he probably could have done better for one of their goals. And, Peel will point to the refereeing performance in the first half, but it doesn't sort of gloss over the fact that we were just shit. And then, you look at their first goal and, people say, oh, there should have been a foul on Bassi before they got the corner. Well, you still got to defend the corner, mate. I've said this multiple times with other teams when they're moaning about VAR not being able to be used about the wire corners given. You still got to defend the corner. Mm-hmm. And yesterday was just a lack of Fulham doing the basics right on both goals and to be fair across the 90 minutes.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to come back to the referee, but actually I was going to go to Jarms with this, and it is about this lack of consistency, Ben. We're looking at a team here who seem to be, transitioning or fluctuating between moments of near perfection, against Forest last weekend, and then the inability at all to really do anything in this Palace game. And we'll come on to Palace and what they did well, but I do feel like with Fulham at the moment, there is this sense of what if that pervades the entire season. And yes, part of it is the whole Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor aspect of this Fulham team. But on top of that, it's you get these performances and you're thinking, okay, if Fulham had played on the Tuesday and we'd said, okay, we put a lot into the Nottingham Forest game, you would have said, okay, maybe just about. You could accept that they're not being that same level of intensity. But the lack of ambition in possession, I thought, was incredibly frustrating from Fulham on Saturday. The lack of quality in the final third. I find it really difficult to kind of find or name a player who had a good game, maybe aside from Sasha Lukic and as Dom said, Bernd Leno.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think this is one of the things that you have to put up with when you follow a mid-table team is just their ability to deliver on a weekly basis kind of isn't there. Dom made a great point around Adama Traore. Last week he looked like prime Cristiano Ronaldo, and then this week it looked like he hadn't touched a ball in 5 years. And I think that that's what you have to deal with when you're a mid-table side that are trying their very best to get to European football. You need to have players in that squad that can deliver on a weekly basis. And whether that's one or two of them that can drag you up, or whether that's, all 11, you're looking for some consistency. And the thing I liked about Silva is he came out post-match and said that there are certain standards that are in our game and they weren't there this week. And he was spot on. There was nothing that Fulham could have done yesterday that could have changed that result. As you said, Jack, credit goes to Crystal Palace, but there are so many shortcomings in this Fulham team. Yesterday highlighted most of them, like very passive in possession, didn't know what to do against a structured low block, couldn't get the fullbacks into the game, couldn't get in behind. And when Alex Iwobi starts doing his thing 50 minutes in, as you said in the WhatsApp chat, then we're on the ropes. And I think that this kind of I think it stems from and is exacerbated by a really underwhelming January transfer window where we rolled in there knowing we had to make upgrades to the squad. We came out the other side of it, February the 1st, 2nd or 3rd, whichever day it ended up being, with no additional players in that squad. It didn't give anyone any momentum. It didn't refresh people that had, dead legs. And I think to compound it even more, yesterday when anything could have gone wrong, it certainly did, because we picked up 2 injuries in the middle of the park to Tom Kenny and then Emil Smith-Rowe. And the big players that we usually rely on to fire just simply didn't even get a light.
Yeah, I mean, Drew, what Ben is referencing there is I have this theory that as soon as Fulham are in a situation where we're chasing a game and you see Alex Iwobi start to run over the top, we've lost the game. Now, that's not to pin the blame on Alex Iwobi. That's not to say that he isn't a wonderful footballer. And I think he is just being like, something has to change. But I think that the point that actually comes from kind of the top of that is that Fulham rely on plan A. right? And this does, to an extent, fall on Marco Silva. Now, some people will say, oh, the best plan B is doing plan A better, right? But there are also elements where you have to be able to change things up if a game isn't going in the direction you want it to. And it felt like Fulham were constantly banging at, their head against a wall yesterday in terms of the way that we were trying to attack Palace. There was no variation in the play. And look, you can say that potentially injuries and the fact that Fulham can't bring players like Harry Wilson off the bench to maybe do something a little bit different matter. But then it goes back to Ben's point about the transfer window and potentially not bringing in reinforcements to allow us to change a game in that regard. And I think that where that leaves Fulham is that if a team go narrow, they force us to be like, okay, play in front of us. You have the ball wide in a way that I thought Forest would last weekend, and they didn't, but Palace did exceptionally well on Saturday. There was no ability to change it up or freshen things or feel like Fulham were going to be able to work out a solution in possession. And that, I think, was the most frustrating aspect of all of it.
Yeah, and we've been this way with Marco Silva since the game, and it's it's the largest stick that you have to beat him with. As good as he's been over the last 4 years, whatever it's been now. And Ben struck the nail on the head. It's just, this is what happens when you are a mid-table side. Now, yeah, we're sitting 8th at the moment or 9th or whatever it is. I mean, that is firmly mid-table. We've got this little headroom ahead of us where we can see this little carrot of European football. But frankly, it's just a bit of a pipe dream, isn't it? I think we haven't got the squad for European football for a start to chase it, to achieve it, let alone to withstand it. So, plan A, is it a Silva? Is it a Silva bloody mindedness, or is it a squad issue? I mean, you look at the bench that we had on Saturday. There's like replacements in there, Pereira for Smith Rowe, Diop in defence, but there's nothing that would allow you to really change your shape and do something different. So it's a bit of both, really. I think Marco Silva is headstrong in the way that he wants to play football and doesn't necessarily entertain Plan B. But I don't think we've got a plethora of sort of different players in the squad that can do anything that different to the way that we are set up. So the problem is we see it time and again when things go wrong, everything just looks so tepid and just so terrible. Despite the fact that we're not in any danger, it's just when it does go wrong, those inefficiencies in the tactics and in the squad are just so laid bare. It's slightly worrying if it wasn't so comfortable in other weeks. It's feast and famine in the middle of the season. It's very strange.
I mean, just to come back on that slightly, Drew, there is an element where Marco Silva does not play a singular brand of football, right? We've seen Fulham play in a variety of different ways this season. We've seen us be more transitional, especially away from home against the big teams, and we've been very effective doing that. At home, we like to dominate the ball a little bit more, but it's not like Fulham have a singular way of playing that comes in, week out. But it does feel like when we run out of ideas, we kind of struggle to change games midway through. And I think that's the element that I'm kind of trying to dig out. Is there something that we need to be working on in terms of, okay, let's say a low block does sit in front of us and they go, okay, play wide, we'll tuck in very narrow. If you want to swing balls into the box, we've got 3 centre-backs in there who are going to head away any danger. And as long as Fulham are playing in front of them, do you need players to start moving through the lines? Do you need to start working? I can't exactly work out what it is. And, I think if any of us could give you a perfect answer here, we'd probably be working for a football club, right? But it does come to the kind of frustration that we know that Marco Silva can vary up play, because we've seen Fulham play in multiple different variations this season, but mid-game we seem to be able to struggle to actually change things up.
Yeah, but you can then level that again with conceding last-minute equalisers and winners that we've seen this season as well. Like there are different variations in the way that you can set up and play in different games, but in-game management, I think both sides of the coin we've seen has been a struggle this season at different points. So, I guess, when I talk about squad depth earlier, this comes firmly down to in-game management from Marco. And I guess, I don't have the answer, but you've seen it on both sides, really, different ways that it's gone against us this season. And if I knew the answer as you say, I'll be in the dugout, but I'm in H5, mate.
Yeah, I know. It's fair enough. It's fair enough. I mean, look, Dom, you said that you were with the Palace mate after the game, and I did want to just give them some credit because I thought they played us perfectly today. And not only did they set up tactically, I think in a very, very smart manner, that's their 5th 2-0 away victory in a row, which shows that they are getting very, very good at doing this to teams on the road, even if they've not been quite as consistent at home. But also, I thought that the way that they played us in terms of winding up the players, there's obviously the little Eze moment where, him and Andersen have that bizarre little standoff in the corner. And the way that they just, took the little clips on players that weren't getting punished. I thought that the whole thing, and we'll talk about the referee in a minute, as I say, but in terms of a Palace perspective, I thought that they managed the game emotionally and tactically really, really well.
Yeah, it was perfect away performance from Palace, and we've seen that in recent games from them that they've done. It's not the first time they've done this. I think they're kind of getting back to the Palace and Oliver Glasner team that we saw towards the end of last season. Maybe slightly less free flowing and free scoring, but we're getting back to that. Obviously, when we beat them in a reverse fixture at Selhurst Park, they were quite depleted of injuries. But surely you would have seen the way Palace have done in these recent away games and maybe try set up tactically to not fall into their traps. But we completely did that. But then I think you can, if you look at their second goal, it's a great one for Mateta to play in Munoz, but it's just pathetic from our players. You've got Pereira and Tom Kenny putting not even half-hearted challenges in, and then Bassi looking like a character from Looney Tunes trying to get the end. So it's like, I think they played us perfectly, and I think as a Palace fan, the Palace fans I was speaking to after the game were saying they couldn't believe how easy it was. People will point to the Palace at home curse, the fact that last we beat them at home, they had Andy Johnson up front. But again, we just fell completely into their hands yesterday. And I'm not saying it was expected, but I don't think there was many Fulham fans going to this game think it was going to be a walkover. But I think a lot of fans were thinking it'll be a close game, but we didn't even put remotely the amount of effort in required to that. And I think you can look at Marco Silva, but I think a lot of yesterday is also just on the players, because I don't think anyone put in the work rate or the effort yesterday to get the win. So I think there's going to be a lot of things for Marco to look at ahead of 2 big games against Wolves and Brighton in the next week or so.
I mean, just on that, right, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of there wasn't really that dynamism, that drive yesterday. And yes, okay, you can point at good opposition. It did kind of make me think this Fulham side, obviously comfortable in mid-table. We are not going to be getting relegated in the season, that's currently going on. And Europe looks increasingly, as Drew mentions, like, unless we get to play all of the big sides in a row, like a bit of a pipe dream at the moment, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that's kind of how it is. But is there a level, do you think, with some of this Fulham squad who are like, this is a very nice place for us to be playing? We're mid-table. We're not getting sucked into these relegation vortexes. If we get to Europe, and again, Drew says it, the squad isn't there at the moment. The squad would have to be expanded quite heavily, I think, in order to compete in European competition. Do you reckon there's a little bit of complacency in terms of, Europe would be nice, but it's not the be-all and end-all for us. We'd like to go on a cup run. We'd like to be mid-table and safe in the Premier League, and we like to give the fans, the results in terms of the Chelsea aways, the Brentford at homes, the games that they seem to be able to get up for in that kind of sense. It did kind of strike me afterwards. I was like, just felt like everyone just was like, Palace are quite good, whatever.
I certainly felt that from a performance side of things, and I liked your point, Jack, around some of the players sitting there and thinking, is this a place where I'm comfortable? I can churn out performances, get a good weekly wage, and then, that's kind of it. But I think there's the other side to that coin is actually the ambition that the club show as well. And I think that, we've made a couple of big sales recently. I'm not going to bring up names because everyone knows who they are. But in the subsequent transfer windows afterwards, I don't feel like the club has necessarily demonstrated the ambition that they want to get into European football by going out and spending some money and signing players that are going to move the needle. I mean, for a club that BBC Sport are saying are in the hunt for the Champions League in the latest report, which one is just wild. I think coming out of that transfer window and only having 36-year-old Willian, who hadn't played in 4 months, to try and move that needle is not good enough. And in a week where we saw Bournemouth drop points and, it's a kind of soft-ish area of the table. To not use the momentum from last week and really push on and get 3 points, I think does, again, demonstrate the ambition of the club as a whole to wanting to get into European football. And I think, like, my final point on this is just, we could have played for 4 or 5 hours yesterday.
Oh, 100%.
In fact, we could still be playing now, and I don't think we would not have scored against Palace. They had our number, and actually the game yesterday is how I envisaged that the game against Forest would have gone the week before. And actually, we saw the inverse. So, I just think that there's a certain air of ambition around the club that is lacking. And to break into European football as a mid-table team is very, very tough. And I think we've seen it time and time again over the course of Premier League history that when you stand still, it catches up with you. I mean, I think immediately to Southampton, who were kind of treading water for ages in the middle of the table and at one point just drowned. And they're going to find it really hard to come back up and stay up. And I don't want that to happen to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on, Ben, in what you say there. Drew, obviously, you were in H5, I was in H4, and I think it's probably time to talk about the referee. In the first half, there were some decisions that seemed a little bit quizzical, to say the least. And the feeling at halftime was of frustration, right? And I think Dom's right in that it's not even the first corner that they score from after the whole Bassey incident in the middle of the pitch. Having watched it back, I do actually think he gets a fair bit of the ball when he makes that challenge. But the frustration at the time, was evident with the Fulham players as much as anything else. Anthony Robinson straight over to the referee, the players surrounding them, and then they actually get rid of the first corner. It's the second one, which we concede from. And at halftime, you're sitting there going, the referee's not having a great game, and there's that frustration around it. But at the end of the game, that had completely dissipated from where I was standing, because in order to blame a referee or to lie blame an official's door, I think you have to have put in a performance that warrants getting something out of the game. And whilst there is obviously frustration with some of those decisions, I can't sit here and say that the reason Fulham lost that game yesterday is because of the referee. The reason that Fulham lost that game yesterday is because Fulham.
Oh God, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is as well. Every single game, whenever something goes against us, I'm always first one up, shouting and whatever. But exactly that, and I think Charlie Shaw put it in the player ratings, or maybe Stephen Sheldrake put it in the positive and negatives. Anyway, it was on the website. Check it out, please. Fulhamish.co.uk. You can't blame the ref in a game like that yesterday, as you said, Jack. When you have all that possession, you do absolutely nothing with it. You don't even have a shot on target. Like, you cannot be talking about the referee in any way, shape, or form. And what was it? 3-4 years since the last time we've had a game where we haven't even registered on target. I mean, that's just mad, isn't it? And it just, Ben says we could have played 5 hours and not scored against Palace. I thought the game lasted about 5 hours. That's how bad and insipid it was. I mean, the ref, Robert Jones, wasn't it? I had a look at him after the game, and he's younger than me, which is a bit odd. I'm not saying I'm a spring chicken, but these refs are feeling a little bit younger. I don't remember having too much of a run-in with him before, but I mean, I think we only have ourselves to blame, don't we?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Dom, one of the other points I wanted to bring up, and it's not because he scored an own goal yesterday, because that could happen to anyone, but is it time to have a bit of a conversation about Joachim Andersen? Because when he was out, Issa Diop came in and didn't do loads to deserve being dropped. I thought he was pretty consistent over the spell that he came into the team and worked in there alongside Calvin Bassey. We moved to the 5 at the back to basically work Joachim Andersen back into the setup. And I appreciate that we spent quite a lot of money on him in the summer, and therefore you want those players to be in and around it. And equally, I've sat here before and talked about leadership and, the fact that this Fulham team doesn't feel like there are loads of leaders in the camp, especially when things get a little bit tough. But I think since he's come back from that injury, I don't think I could sit here and tell you that I've seen Joachim Andersen have a brilliant game in that period.
No, I've said it about him and Smith Rowe, two sort of marquee summer signings. They've come back from injury, December-ish time, and they've both looked pretty average apart from against Forest last week. One game that does stick in my mind was that Liverpool away game when we were like, oh no, we got both our first 2 centre-backs out injured in Bassey and Andersen. Quanker and Diop come in. I know Diop made a mistake, obviously, for the second Liverpool goal, but apart from that, it was one of our better defensive performances of the season. And Diop at the time, since when we switched back to a back forward, hasn't deserved to be dropped. And to me, Andersen, he had a good start to coming back into the Fulham team. But as we mentioned, since the injury, I think he's been very poor. And I would like to see Diop come back in, because I often feel like Issa Diop has been not a scapegoat over the last couple of seasons, but I just feel like, because often when he makes a mistake, he doesn't make many of them, but often when he does, they do lead to a goal. But I honestly, he didn't deserve to be dropped at the time, and I wouldn't mind seeing him come back in with this Wolves and Brighton game, especially with 2 games in a week. There might be some more rotation, but Andersen hasn't been up to scratch. I don't think defensively of a team we've really been up to scratch in this season overall. We've been sort of winning games not by winning 2-0 but winning by 2-1s. So I would like to see Diop come back in and see if because to me, in the games he was covering Andersen when he was out, he's played better in those games since Andersen's come back. So I think there's a lot of conversations to be about quite a lot of players, to be honest. You look at Alex Iwobi since December, I don't think's really been up to much. Even one thing that does stick in my mind was actually that Liverpool away game with Alex Iwobi, and he just looked knackered. And Silva doesn't seem to drop him. He weirdly played him in that Watford FA Cup game where I don't think he needed to play. And I think he just does look knackered. Then I know Smith Rowe had a good game last week, but since he's come back from injury, he hasn't really been sticking up trees. You've got Traore. Yes, again, he had a good game last week, but he's not been doing too much. I know it's down to the squad depth that we have. I think if you're looking at the team and players since sort of Christmas have really impressed, you probably only look at the likes of Lukic and Sander Berge, if you're being perfectly honest.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's one of those things where, if Fulham, we can't rotate, Ben, in lots of different areas because currently, we don't have the depth. There's not players to play in those wide areas if, Adama and Alex Iwobi don't start in there because, as you said, Willian has just come back from, 4 months where he basically hasn't played. We've seen him obviously sparingly, and he did well in the sort of 10 minutes he played in the Nottingham Forest game, but he's clearly not ready to start a game considering his fitness levels. And Marco said it could be 3-4 weeks, before we really see him kind of up to that level. Now, Reece Nelson is injured and potentially out for the rest of the season. Marco Silva said that in his press conference before this game. We know that Harry Wilson is not coming back anytime soon, and so it makes it very difficult to rotate in those wide areas. And I know that comes back to the point you were making about a lack of ambition in the transfer market and a lack of reinforcements when we needed them. But, there are certain places where rotation can happen. And it feels like, okay, Emma Smith Rowe started this game because he was very, very good in the Nottingham Forest game. And now he's injured. But even if he wasn't, I think I would be bringing back Andreas for this game, against Wolves in midweek. Is this a game where, maybe Marco goes, everyone's legs are a little bit gone? Does Marshall Goddo or Josh King get a start on the wing just to try and freshen things up a little bit? And I know that that's risky, but I think it's equally risky going with the same team again, especially if we're starting to see, banging your head against the same wall over and over again and expecting different results at this point feels like an exercise in madness. So I wonder what this looks like. And we'll come on to the Wolves game, but I think the kind of point is more the rotations in the squad don't feel like they're happening with certain players, even if those rotations feel like they're warranted.
Yes, completely agree. And I think it's compounded by the fact that we only really play one style of football under Silva. And if we had a little bit more tactical flexibility, I think that allows for a better rotation within the squad. For example, if we're really, really light on wingers, which we are, and we wanted to play a 3-5-2, 5-3-2, however you want to kind of set that up, then I think that having that flexibility and being comfortable tactically allows you to do that. Notably because we just have more options at the back. Obviously, right back is an issue. The fact that if Timothy Castagna goes down, we have Devin Tanton coming into the squad is less than ideal. But the fact that Fulham have allowed themselves to get in this position where we're hamstrung by the amount of players we have available to us, we're hamstrung by tactical flexibility, I think is just, it's a glaring kind of issue that Fulham should look at in the off-season this year and try and remedy in upcoming transfer windows. I think that's all I really have to add to that. I think just from a performance standpoint yesterday, the thing that stood out for me in comparison to Palace is just the intensity that we brought in comparison to them. And I think that was really highlighted by the second goal, the one that was chalked off where Mateta was just barely offside. The fact that we kind of had to rely on the toe of a boot to save us from a second goal should have given Fulham enough of a rocket up the backside to go out and really start to take the game to Palace. And really, it never happened. And even just in isolation, when looking at the build-up to that goal, everyone in and around a Palace player was static. Palace were making great moves. They were one touch and moving. And the back heel from Eze through the gap in the defence was absolutely sublime. And being completely honest, worthy of a goal in itself. So a little bit ruining that VAR chalked that off somewhat. But I thought that, just generally all over the pitch, Fulham lacked intensity everywhere. And where Palace were quick back into their shape and holding those banks of 4 and 5, Fulham were taking forever to get back into shape. And they were so easy to play through in the middle. Even, as you say, Sander Berge, who has looked pretty good over the last few weeks, looks completely out of his depth against, of all people, Will Hughes.
I mean, he was arguing one of Palace's best players yesterday as well.
Yeah, he was excellent.
Yeah, I think
and put everyone to shame.
Yeah, 100%. Just is one of those. I mean, look, this is the last point I'm going to make on this before we take a break, but it comes to you, Drew. And it's just kind of struck me right now as we were talking about this and talking about systems and talking about Issa Diop. Issa Diop came on, and I assumed Fulham were going to a 3 at the back system because he came on for Castagna. Instead, Issa Diop just played right back. And I don't think I've seen anything look quite that weird for some time. And sort of just looking at it and going, surely the system's going to change. Surely something's happening here where we're going 2 up top with Muniz and Raul, who both finished the game on the pitch together. Surely Adama goes to wing back at this point. Surely this looks slightly different. And instead, it just didn't. It just looked like a 4-4-2 with Issa Diop playing right back. And I don't think I've ever been more confused.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit Big Bird in the boardroom, wasn't it? Like nobody really, what was really going on? Something was standing out like a sore thumb. I wondered whether he was going rogue or whether it was the Marco telling him, instructing him to do it. But I mean, yeah, it sums up pretty much all of the things that we've been talking about, really, in terms of Marco's tactical ideas and squad depth and ambition in the transfer market, and it's all that in one example, really, wrapped up with a tiny bow. But this is going to sound a little bit like, oh, I didn't like her anyway. But the more I think about it, the more I don't necessarily think I want to qualify for Europe this season. We're all thinking about 2010, but I think what it will be is, half a dozen games, getting gubbed a couple of times by some clubs you never heard of, and then finishing 17th because we haven't got anywhere near the depth to cope with it. I'd much rather just go hell for leather in the cup, and then that that definitely sounds yadar. But I the more I think about it, the more that's what I'm after.
Yeah, hell for leather in the cup, win the cup, and end up in Europe anyway, Drew. We're gonna end up in the same predicament. Right, on that note, I think it's probably time for us to take a break. Afterwards, we're going to be talking about the Wolves game this Tuesday evening. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Fulhamish podcast. Just before we get into Wolves, a word to say that there is a Fulhamish live show happening again in March. We're going to be back at the Half Moon Putney after the Tottenham game on the 16th of March, doors at 4:30. And all your Fulhamish favourites are going to be there alongside special guest Paul Cooper, who plays Martin Mucklow in the BBC's This Country. It's going to be a lot of fun. So get on to the link in the description where you can find the tickets, and we'll have a good go, hopefully looking back at a big win over a good side, again, we should say, about Tottenham Hotspur at this point. So very, very excited for that. Make sure you get your tickets in. I get to do the first plug for that show, which is very exciting. Right, Wolves, Jack Collins here alongside Dom Betts, Drew Heatley and Ben Jarman. Big win for Wolverhampton Wanderers at the weekend, Dom. They beat Bournemouth 1-0. They were helped by a red card, a slightly soft red card. But in terms of the performance, this is exactly what Wolves fans fans have been crying out for. And from a week ago, where I was quite looking forward to this trip to Molineux, after what we did on Saturday and what they did on Saturday, things immediately look a whole lot more sticky.
There's no such thing as looking forward to a trip to Molineux.
Hey, at least the fire, it might be cold on Tuesday, so we're not going to burn. It will actually be some welcome warmth.
I also feel like our record there is just terrible. Like I'm trying to think of like a win. Like the only thing that springs to mind to me is the penalty shootout victory in the snow back in, what was it, like 2014 or 2015?
16, I want to say.
Yeah, yeah, whatever. But I feel like our record there isn't great. But no, it's actually quite a big game now. I think Wolves' win at Bournemouth has basically not like mathematically kept them safe, but I don't think any of the bottom three are going to be catching Wolves, especially with the quality they've got. They definitely look a bit better, bit more of a better side, I think, under Pereira than he did under Gary O'Neill. And they'll be right up for this game, you know, especially after that win against Bournemouth. You know, if they get a win here, they'll basically see themselves as safe. We're going to need to bounce back, you know. Away from home, you might argue if they've got to take the game onto us, we might have a bit more opportunity. But I think hopefully it's all the players wanting to react to the game that happened on the weekend against Crystal Palace. But I said, you know, that we saw what Mateus Cunha can do against us in the home game. So let's very much hope it's not a repeat of that.
Well, we talked about the Palace curse. I've just done some digging, and the last time that Fulham won at Molineux in the league was in 1985. So our record at the Mole is even worse than our home record against Crystal Palace. So we can stick that one down. 40 years since Fulham have won at Molineux in the league. And that was in Division 2, the old Division 2. I mean, Ben, look, obviously it does feel like Wolves probably have enough now to pull themselves clear. I wasn't hugely sold on the Vitor Pereira appointment as manager there, replacing Gary O'Neill, but ultimately he can organise a defence. He's kind of always shown that throughout his career. And it does feel like Wolves are moving in the right direction. Some of the kind of disparate parts of what felt like an overly emotional squad that were going in different directions appear to have been pulled together somewhat.
Definitely. And I think that stems from our old friend Mario Lemina, who managed to force himself out in January after, trying to force a move, then crying to the manager to stay at Wolverhampton Wanderers. Just a side note, I don't know why anyone would try and cry to stay in Wolverhampton. You'd probably cry to get out of Wolverhampton. And then did eventually end up leaving Wolves for pastures new. And I think, as you say, Jack, that's pulled the squad together. And just looking at the quick highlights that I saw of Wolves yesterday, they looked like, albeit against 10 men, a much better unit, a little bit more creative and quicker through the thirds. And I think that's the main difference that we're going to see between those two brands of football, is that with Gary O'Neill in charge, they seem to be quite slow, quite predictable in terms of their build-up, and they were relying on one or two players and their flair to make something happen. Obviously, Pereira's come in. Cunha scored four goals in 4 games, and I think that they're starting to pick up a real head of steam. And I think even though their form is 2 wins in the last kind of 6 games, I believe, their performances are starting to come together, and 2 of those or 3 of those 6 games have come against sides in the top 6. So I think things are looking brighter for Wolves, and I do agree they're pulling away from that so-called bottom 3 at the moment, 5 or 6 points ahead of those guys, and I think they've definitely got enough in that squad to give us a big issues. I think Ryan Aït-Nouri down that left-hand side has been such an amazing player for them over the sort of last 4 or 5 years. Really one of the best, in my opinion, at the very least, one of the best like pure wing backs in the Premier League, and maybe Europe is a step too far, but I think he's someone to look out for. And I think that he'll cause us a big deal of problems, especially if we are lacking for wide players, which we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, Drew, talking of causing us issues, obviously we don't have to look too far back to see Wolves causing us all sorts of issues because they came to the Cottage at the back end of last year and won 4-1. Now, obviously, it's a different side at this point. It's under new management. There have been changes to shape and formation and tactics, but it doesn't take a lot to look back and be like, oh, Mateus Cunha had our number that day, and that feels like it could be an issue again.
Yeah, he's coming back into form at the right time for them and the wrong time for us. We're not bad on the road, though, are we? We've won the last couple of games on the road, and I know that it's been 40 years since we've done it at Molineux. That's kind of thrown all of my optimism out the window. But Wolves, they haven't had a great season. They've not been particularly great at home, a couple of wins in the last 6 if I'm looking at the form table at the moment. So it's difficult one to call. I mean, the reason I can cope with this Palace game that we've just dissected is that there's not very often in the season you get a game midweek straight afterwards to try and put things right. So but it's just not really the one on paper that we'd really like. But it's 30 years to the day from my first Fulham match, so maybe that is something that can counter that 40-year wait for a win at Molineux. What a great present that would be, as it's also my birthday.
Oh, amazing. This is Drew Heatley versus history on his birthday. That's something quite special. Great week to be born, Drew. I will say that. Great week to be born. My birthday.
Oh, quite, yes.
In the week coming up. So that's nice. I mean, look, Dom, I was going to come on to this, and I'm glad Drew's brought it up there because we have, whilst there are reasons to be fearful, I think given the performances at the weekend, given where Wolves are right now, there is also the kind of caveat and kind of opposite factor of that Fulham have beaten better teams than this Wolves side on the road this season, notably Newcastle a couple of weeks ago. Going to St James's Park has also not been that happy a hunting ground for us, and Fulham managed to make that game look relatively easy, in hindsight, especially with that performance in the second half and the way that duels were contested, the way that we won the second ball so regularly, the performance of Raul. And there is also this whole Raul and Adama factor that comes into it in terms of them wanting to prove a point against their former club.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, but I don't know. I think especially with this game, it's just I never had that much confidence going into a game at Molineux. But you hopefully, you mentioned the Raul and Dharma factor. There's that. You hope the players want to bounce back because I'm sure Marco gave them a battering in their change room at full time and half time. So you're hoping they'll bounce back from this. But if we don't get this, we've got to guarantee 3 points because we play Brighton at the following game. So we never lose to them. But it would sum us up to break our Wolves hoodoo and then also Brighton break their hoodoo against us on the weekend following. But I think hopefully just the reaction from the game against Palace on the weekend, hopefully there's some changes. So players who are coming in maybe want to prove a point. Maybe Diop comes in. Maybe Pereira comes in for Smith Rowe. Just maybe there's some players who come in who haven't been playing as much who want to prove a point. Hopefully that can work in our favour, but I'm not overly confident going into this fixture, but hopefully I'm wrong and there's a lot of reaction from the performance on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you in that I don't feel particularly good about this, but every fixture that we seem to play where I don't feel good about it, we seem to win. And every fixture I come in being like, I fancy us today, we seem to lose. So,
and also, I'm not going, so we'll probably win.
The Dom bet.
I'm pretty sure I'm beaten this season when I haven't gone. So ain't gonna lose.
Fingers crossed. So it's Drew Heatley's 30th anniversary and the Dom Betts curse versus history in terms of how we're playing this one. I'm excited to see how this one plays out. I'm going to ask you all this, but I'll start with you, Ben. What changes would you make? What would you like to see in this game against Wolves? Do you think that there is a potential shift of system here, given that some of the players that we have out at the moment obviously do work in various capacities and we do feel short in those wide areas, as you say? I wouldn't be overly surprised to see Silva potentially go back to using a 3 at the back system just to try and make things work for a little while or try and kind of shore things up and change things. Equally, there is that kind of element that if you're playing against this Wolves side who play within that system and, have played with it for a longer period than we have, maybe you're giving them the advantage by reverting to type in that regard.
I'm absolutely here for the chaos, and I'm good with a 5-3-2, 3-5-2, however you want to say it. And actually, I think it would be great to bring in Muniz. And that, for me personally to say that, I think it takes a lot because I'm firmly in camp Raul. But I thought Raul yesterday was absolutely atrocious. And when he was through on goal for that opportunity, I don't think I've seen a man run slower. So I think we need to pop Muniz back in, give him a bit of a run. And honestly, I wouldn't mind pairing him up with someone like Adama so we could maybe try and get in behind a little bit more and switch to that three at the back system. Midfield three of Lukic, Pereira, and Berger would be pretty good, I think. And we can really start to let Pereira kind of drift into those wider positions if we want to make that a front three. I wouldn't be adverse to that. And I think that could cause Wolves some trouble, especially if we were going to break kind of like high and wide. I think that could work. But we know we won't change it.
Drew?
Well, we'll see Pereira in for Smith Rowe. I feel like I think there's going to be some foreboding news about him. How people feel about that is another issue. And I'd bring Muniz in like Ben would in place of Jimenez. Other than that, I can't see much going in. I think the Diop narrative's getting louder. But again, in terms of changing the sort of tactics and formation and things, I think it would be largely the same, bar one or two changes. But that's probably what I'd do.
Dominic?
Yeah, if it was down to me, I'd stick with the same system, but bring in Diop for Andersen, Pereira for Smith Rowe, and probably try Willian out wide left instead of Iwobi, just because I think Iwobi's just knackered. And I think he could do with a rest, especially with his Brighton game coming up on the weekend. But knowing Silva, Silva could throw the cat amongst pigeons and totally, as you said, go back to that three at the back formation and Muniz. I do think I'd still buy Jimenez just for that factor of him going back to his old club and probably want to perform. It's not like he has a bad relationship with the fans. They definitely love him. We saw that in the game at Craven Cottage. But yeah, I imagine I'd stick with the same system, but make a few of those changes for players like Pereira, like Diop, who want to prove a point. And I'd like to see, when Willian came on against Forest the other week, to look back to his old self. So that's probably the changes I'd go for this game, and hopefully it can change our fortunes around compared to the Palace game.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I do wonder if this is a moment where Silva goes, I'm just going to shake things up a little bit after the weekend. And, you saw his comments afterwards. And yes, he said the referee didn't give us loads of help, but equally he didn't shy away from the fact that the performance was substandard and, and under par from where Fulham have come to expect. And I think this is it with all of it, right? You can take these games where Fulham lose because, you made the point earlier, Ben, and Drew, you backed it up. Fulham are a mid-table side. We are not going to win every game, and I don't think anyone expects Fulham to win every game. I think, when we're talking about these games and we're discussing them, it's not necessarily the result here that has really frustrated me. It's been the level of application and the lack of any feeling of that Fulham were ever going to find a way in this game. That was the thing that I think got on top of me yesterday, because there are very few games I come out of feeling incredibly dejected. Even the Wolves game, which was obviously a terrible result at home, the back end of last year, I came out of that game and I was like, you know what? A couple of things have transpired against us there. We weren't able to step on the pedal when we had the advantage. And then obviously there's the game ending with 10 men and a couple of really good finishes. And you come out of that and you're obviously frustrated about the result and maybe the fact that Fulham weren't able to press an advantage. But I didn't come out of that game dejected in the way that I did against Palace at the weekend. I really, really was low. And I think it's the level of application, as we say, the fact that Fulham didn't look like they had any ideas and weren't able to build on the momentum that really hit home. So this is, as you say, Drew, an opportunity to kind of make things right immediately, to potentially put what could be a blip behind Fulham. If you go and win at Molineux this week, on Tuesday night, people forget the Palace game quite quickly, right? Because you've managed to bounce back at a place, one, you don't normally win, as we've discussed, but also that you have that opportunity to just be like, okay, you just wipe that we're going to be able to set ourselves up here to change our fortunes and become kind of masters of our own fate once again. And so we come to this in hope, and obviously but a level of expectation that performances will be raised. And yet it remains a tricky game. So we'll have to see how things go. Good luck if you are traveling to Molineux on those late night trains. I know we're going to be getting a 10:45 to try and make it work for some people. It's a late night in the Black Country if you're over there. But I'm very, very excited to see if Fulham can fix this Molineux record, but also bounce back from the performance against Palace. And I think that pretty much brings us to a close for today's episode. Thank you, boys, for a wonderful therapy session. I feel a little bit better about all of it now. Drew, I'm going to hand over to you to name this podcast.
Yeah, for me, it's Passports Away Again just really sums up how I've been feeling this season. I think Saturday sums up the existential crisis you have as a mid-table Premier League football club fan, whereas when you win, it's excellent, and when you lose, it's the end of the world. And my passport is back firmly in my pocket, certainly until Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you've gone with this because I chose Put's Passport Away after the West Ham game earlier this season, and Fulham did actually bounce back from that to try and make me look stupid. So I hope that they're going to make you look stupid on your birthday, Drew, as we get to it. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to my wonderful panel. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Dominic Betts.
No worries, mate.
Thank you very much to Mr. Drew Heatley.
Cheers, Jack.
And thank you very much all the way from Canada to Mr. Ben Jarman. A pleasure having you back on, mate.
Thank you very much, lads. It's been great being back on with an OG lineup, and I'm now going to go back out onto the slopes of Worcester and try not to break my leg. So, yeah, thanks. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was great to have you. Please don't break your leg, Jarms. I don't want to be hearing any sirens from across the ocean on my WhatsApp chats tonight. We wish you all the best. Thank you to all of you for listening to this podcast. Let's hope the Fulham can right things at Molineux on Tuesday and end that curse for Drew Heatley and will be a lovely, lovely birthday present. And we will see you all on the Thursday Club to look back at that game and hopefully be talking about a win. But for now, thanks for listening. You Whites.